My regards, friends. Welcome to my channel. I'm Alexander Musienko. Today is Tuesday, the 27th of May. And here is my traditional briefing on the events that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. So, here is the latest operational information about what is happening right now. On the front, for example, the enemy is assaulting the Sumy region. And there is information that, unfortunately, Russia has managed to advance and occupy 3 villages in the Sumy region. This was reported by the Sumy military administration. That is, the enemy did manage to break through our defensive line there and pushed forward. Our troops are continuing a containment operation. Well, this is what Russia was talking about the need to create a buffer zone. However, right now it is still very small. And for example, in the State Border Guard Service, Andriy Demchenko, the spokesperson, says that the most active direction is toward the settlements of Basivka and Zhuravka. But in recent days, we see that the enemy is trying to expand the directions and is employing this tactic here. To the left of Zhuravka, the direction is toward the settlements of Volodymyrivka and Veselivka. The enemy is conducting offensive actions in the Sumy region with small assault groups. Nothing new is happening, meaning the enemy is acting in the same way. And overall, Russia has amassed certain forces. We already knew this earlier in the Kursk and Belgorod regions. Ukrainian forces are doing everything possible to hold them back, but the shortage of manpower is making itself felt in some areas. As a result, we see that the enemy has managed to break through. Although I want to remind you that it was already dangerous in these villages before, because evacuation and resettlement had previously been carried out by the relevant military administration authorities, since Russia was actively shelling these areas with both glide bombs, artillery, FPV drones, and other types of unmanned aerial vehicles. Accordingly, it was dangerous for the residents, which is why they were being relocated anyway. There is nothing new about this, but this is how the enemy is breaking through. This is how they want to create an image. I would say that this is more about creating an image. This is not about capturing Sumy, but rather about creating exactly this kind of image that supposedly the enemy, supposedly Russia, is trying to implement what it has declared, namely the creation of a buffer zone. And this is exactly what the enemy is aiming for right now. They could also become more active on the Kharkiv side from the direction of the Belgorod region. So this is something that really could happen in the near future, and we need to be prepared for it. In the rest of the areas, the situation at the front is difficult, but overall there is no significant enemy advance being recorded. We are managing to hold back the enemy, and while Ukraine is holding back the enemy, despite the fact that we are sometimes lacking resources and we need more weapons, we need more forces. That is a fact. Well, that's obvious. In fact, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, Ole Ivashchenko, noted that after Ukraine, it will take Russia about 2 to 4 years to restore its combat capability. Thus, Mr. Ivashchenko's forecast coincides with the predictions put forward and discussed by Western intelligence agencies and European Union politicians. I would like to remind you that the figure being mentioned and the date that is often discussed is specifically the year 2030. That is, by 2030, European countries must be prepared for the possibility that Russia could launch an invasion through the countries of Northern Europe, the Baltics and Poland, moving further west, testing and probing the response of NATO and the European Union. And these risks are real. They are being discussed around the world, and our intelligence is talking about them as well. And here is how Oleg Ivashchenko comments on this. He believes that after the war against Ukraine ends, Russia will be ready for aggression against Europe in just 2 to 4 years. According to him, Russia's plans have not changed. The aggressor country still wants full control over Ukraine and influence over the post-Soviet countries. But going further is no longer possible. The question is just a matter of time. Who will be next? Poland, the Baltic countries, and Northern Europe are in the risk zone, Ivashchenko said. According to forecasts by Ukrainian intelligence, which are shared by European allies, after the end of hostilities against Ukraine, Russia will need up to 2 to 4 years to restore its combat capability. If sanctions are lifted, the rearmament process will proceed much faster. That is, 2 to 4 years after the end of the war, it will be ready for new aggression. Well, indeed, that's the case. This is being discussed in Europe, preparations are underway, and efforts are being made to counter this. Another question is what to do. For example, well, what should NATO do, for instance? Because right now it seems like they are scared, since the next summit, which is supposed to take place on June 24-25 in the Netherlands, is expected to proceed without any public disputes regarding Ukraine. This is the goal set by the new Secretary General of the Alliance, Mark Rutte. This is reported by the New York Times. Rutte aims to focus the meeting on new targets concerning Russian military spending, rather than on disagreements among the allies. However, as the Times notes, the situation could be complicated by two participants, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. The US president is expected to attend the summit despite his open skepticism about supporting Ukraine and the role of the United States in European security. The US is also preparing significant changes in the deployment of American troops in Europe. Although the Trump administration does not publicly deny its commitments to its allies, behind the scenes a new military rotation is being prepared that could shift the balance of power on the continent. Rutte aims to focus the meeting on new targets for military spending rather than on disagreements among the allies. Wise, but won't military spending itself cause disagreements among the allies? The pace of buildup and increase in military spending constantly sparks debates and heated discussions among the allies. Well, Russia aims to focus, Rutte aims, to focus the meeting on new goals. We remain an excellent partner and ally, assured Matthew Wittek, the new US ambassador to NATO. Ukraine's role at the summit is still in question, and it is unknown whether Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, will be invited. That, by the way, is also uncertain. I hope he will be invited, but there are various signals suggesting he might not be. Although Wittek said that he expects Zelensky to be in The Hague. Obviously, this year's summit will not include a meeting of the Ukraine-NATO Council, where previously both sides sat down at the negotiating table as equals. Instead, Zelensky's participation may be limited to a parallel forum that will take place alongside the NATO summit. This is a defense industry forum. According to diplomats, this year's final declaration text will be shorter. The issue of Ukraine's NATO membership will remain vague. European allies are ready to support Kiev, but they do not expect that Trump or the US Congress will agree to new large aid packages. Well, that's the situation. Both the issue of aid, the issue of NATO membership, and the matter of cooperation with the West are all in question. We can see that Trump might make an appearance. Indeed, he will make an impressive speech and call for increased spending. But for us, the difficult point is that we ultimately need to reach an agreement with the Americans so that they approve the sale of weapons and the same Patriots, if they are unwilling to provide them as non-repayable aid. And then there are the Europeans on whom hopes are also pinned, but it is clear that there is no significant progress in relations with the United States. Everyone is trying to persuade Trump. Everyone is trying to say, come on, we need to support Ukraine, that Putin is lying. It's been about a day, even a day and a half, since the President of the United States said that Putin is some kind of madman. You can't do what he's doing. So for one night, Putin stopped the massive attacks with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and Shaheds. Although there were fewer Shaheds, they were still used that night. And you understand that this didn't happen because Trump called for it. But Putin will present it as if for at least a day or two he listened to Donald Trump. This happened simply because Russia needs to carry out certain technical operations related to transporting missiles, reloading, and preparing for further missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian territory. Unfortunately, I don't have any optimistic forecasts here. Russia will keep doing this as long as they have the capability to produce drones and direct them at our territory. That's why we need to strengthen ourselves. For us today, besides the front line, there are fronts in other places as well, because we see that Russia is striking. Russia is trying to play on demoralization, to suppress resistance and so on. It isn't working, but they will keep trying to terrorize us. That's why we need more systems. And in this regard, the enemy, now even the enemy, has started writing that Ukraine is becoming more and more successful. For now, these are not widespread or large-scale cases. But at the same time, there are already cases where Ukraine is increasingly successfully using interceptor drones against Russian Shaheds. So I hope that this will only be scaled up, expanded, and that we will gain more opportunities to work in this direction. After all, The Economist has written that Shaheds are no longer affected by Ukrainian electronic warfare, are guided by artificial intelligence, and use mobile networks to transmit data. The media also reported that inside one Shahed, a note was found, which was likely left by one of the Russian engineers. In it, according to the publication, it is said that the drones are controlled via bots in Telegram. Well, the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation somewhat refuted this. He noted that the story about nodes inside Shaheds and control via Telegram bots is, of course, something else. As for remote control, some Shaheds have been operated this way since last year. Cameras were installed on them and they were controlled remotely, and there's nothing sensational about them being shot down. Also, according to him, there is no artificial intelligence in the Shaheds. The Russians have another strike drone, the She, which does have artificial intelligence, but that's not a Shahed. Overall, without China, the Russians do not have the capability for serious development of AI that, frankly, could compete with the West. Unfortunately, we don't have it either. Let's admit it, we need to strengthen these developments, but for now, unfortunately, we don't have any established projects using artificial intelligence. After all, developments based on artificial intelligence are coming from the USA, China, Britain, France, and to some extent Germany. China is indeed quite powerful. So the fact that Russia is not developing this on its own, of course, indicates its technological backwardness. And there's nothing surprising for us about that. But the fact that they have a partner like China, which has been actively and for a long time researching artificial intelligence and is trying to challenge the West in this field, is certainly a problem and a threat. That's why these Shaheds are constantly being studied. That's why ongoing research is being conducted to better counter them. Because now there are more and more media reports saying that we lack the means to effectively counter and shoot them down. And the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, will raise this issue with our partners. But there are interceptor drones and we can place our hopes on them. Plus, Shaheds fly at high altitudes, so not everyone can reach them. It's simple as that. This isn't about artificial intelligence or some kind of know-how or innovations from Russia's failed Skolkovo. These are just objective facts, plain and simple. And President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, emphasized that Russia, like any criminal, can only be stopped by force. He also stressed that the increase in Russian attacks should be met not with words, but with decisive economic actions. Only through strength, the strength of the United States of America, the strength of Europe, the strength of all nations that respect life, can we achieve a complete end to these strikes and real peace. The increase in Russian strikes should be met with increased sanctions. Russia's disregard for diplomacy and refusal to cease fire must be answered by blocking Russian finances, trade, and Russian oil. By the way, regarding the blocking of Russian assets, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, Ivashenko, once again provided an explanation in an interview for Ukrinform. He specifically mentioned that a certain Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's special envoy from Russia, who traveled among other places to the United States of America, went there to discuss the issue of Russian frozen assets, aiming to ensure that the interest from those assets would not be used to help Ukraine, and especially not for purchasing weapons for our country. This was one of the goals that Dmitriev was pursuing. Well, frankly speaking, I think we had no doubt that Dmitriev was also pursuing a financial and economic interest. And for this purpose, in fact, he traveled to the United States, which he eventually mentioned in interviews with Izvestia and directly with Fox News. And the New York Times, citing its own sources, writes that Trump is not currently considering the option of strengthening sanctions even after phone conversations with European leaders, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and Putin. Putin allegedly convinced Trump that everything should proceed as it is, that the process of ceasefire and negotiations is not as quick as it seems, and that time is needed, including the need to put pressure on Ukraine as well. And Trump continues to reproach us, to reproach our president. In other words, the situation is complicated. At the moment, there is no clear solution in sight, although once again, Lindsey Graham from the Senate gave a comment to the American media and noted that there is a sanctions package of 500% or more in tariffs and sanctions against those countries that continue to buy Russian gas, oil, and uranium. But for now, the Senate is not moving forward with considering this issue. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that the Russian dictator Putin perceives peace negotiations as a sign of weakness after the recent failed ceasefire talks. According to him, for Putin, negotiations with Ukraine are a sign of weakness. It is clear that Putin sees this as a weakness. If even the proposal for a meeting in the Vatican does not receive Russia's approval, we must prepare for the fact that this war will last longer than we want or can imagine. An honest answer, truly an honest answer from Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor. Russia rejects the proposal to hold negotiations specifically in the Vatican. Satanists cannot go there for obvious reasons. They cannot conduct negotiations in holy places. And moreover, for them it would mean, well, let's say, how awkward it would be in front of their own Orthodox followers. Well, I think this is a reason for the Vatican to limit, if not completely cut off and terminate its ties with the Russian Orthodox Church. The time has come. The time has come to break ties with them. The time has come to push the Russian Orthodox Church to the margins, to where it belongs. In other words, they should not be considered a Christian Orthodox Church, but rather apostates in the service of Satanists who support killings, who support hatred, who support aggression. I see no other way out here. Meanwhile, Turkey is trying to secure its position as a negotiation platform in Istanbul regarding the issue between Russia and Ukraine. The head of Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hakan Fidan, was on a visit to Moscow, during which he had a number of meetings scheduled. He was also supposed to meet with Medinsky, the head of the Russian negotiation delegation in Istanbul. Minister Hakan Fidan met in Moscow with Vladimir Medinsky, advisor to the President of Russia. Also, Fidan will meet with Putin and Lavrov. Well, obviously, what does this mean? Clearly, this is preparation for some kind of proposals. After all, Russia had promised that as early as last week, a draft memorandum would be presented for consideration regarding how Russia envisions a ceasefire, further negotiations, and so on. But the week ended and nothing was presented. Instead, there was an intensification of missile and drone attacks. Is anyone really surprised by this? Now we'll see if there will be an opportunity for the next meeting. Meanwhile, the Netherlands has handed over and completed the process of transferring F-16 aircraft to Ukraine. They demonstrated this, and the Netherlands spoke about it as the country that started the campaign and was the first to declare that they were ready to transfer their F-16s. And they not only made a statement, but also took real steps and actions toward this. We see that they consistently continue and very actively support Ukraine. We are grateful to our partners for this, because in addition to the aircraft, this also includes weapons for them, as well as funding for the purchase of weapons from other European countries. It also includes the supply of drones, joint production of unmanned aerial vehicles, and more. We have quite an intensive program in terms of our cooperation with our partners. And now, the Dutch Minister of Defense, Ruben Brekelmans, has announced that his country, which will host the NATO summit in June, is looking for ways to include Ukrainian President Zelensky in the program. It is likely that this will not be a plenary session. We are looking for an opportunity to include Volodymyr Zelensky and other Ukrainians in the summit program. According to him, it is likely that this will not be a plenary session attended by the leaders of the 32 NATO member countries. At the previous summit in Washington in July last year, the President of Ukraine joined the other heads of state. As for the Ukraine NATO Council, most likely if it does take place, it will be shortened to avoid a scandal with President Trump. Well, you can see Europe's weakness. Unfortunately, Europe is demonstrating weakness. They are trying to avoid a scandal. Trump is trying to put pressure on his NATO allies in various ways, financial, political, economic, and in all sorts of ways. Unfortunately, certain European countries are responding to this. We can see that problems are arising. Well, in reality, Trump is doing two things. On the one hand, he is trying to explain that defense spending needs to be increased because there are challenges and threats. On the other hand, by doing so, he is only intensifying the crisis areas and the situation within the alliance's structure, bringing it closer to a split. On one side, there is Putin with his war and aggressive actions. On the other side, there is Trump, who is also putting pressure on the alliance in his own way. So NATO is indeed going through quite a crisis period. A rather critical moment, actually. It's unclear what will happen next and what future awaits this organization here. This is another reason why Putin is waiting, why he manipulates and drags things out. He's waiting to see if there will be more quarrels at the NATO summit in June. Maybe Trump will say something else. Maybe there will be a demonstration of a lack of unity and a common position among the allies regarding Russia, and so on. That's why this is one of the reasons. So I hope the situation will change and the West will act differently. Meanwhile, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, will visit Berlin on Wednesday, May 28th, and meet with the Chancellor of Germany. They will discuss possible steps for further technical negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, as well as plans for a new EU sanctions package against Russia. In addition, it is reported that Zelensky will meet with President Steinmeier in Berlin. According to the publication, it is likely that behind the scenes, the leaders of both countries will discuss further military support for Ukraine. Publicly, the new German government does not want to openly discuss arms supply packages as before, but behind the scenes there are talks about how Germany could help the Ukrainian industry in producing long-range weaponry. Similarly, information has emerged that Germany is ready to supply us with missiles for the Patriot system, but unfortunately, well, let's say unfortunately, they are of an older model. The Germans will also provide Iris-T air defense systems, which have proven themselves very well in this war. But as for the Taurus long-range air-to-surface missiles, the intrigue remains. Nothing is known yet. Well, we will hear the answers to these questions soon. That's how it is. The war continues. Mart said that it might last longer than it seems, because Russia rejects everything. and the West appears far from confident in this situation. Europe is trying to consolidate but still shows a great dependence on Trump. Well, the world is going crazy in many ways, but we will treat these madmen and defend ourselves from them. Take care of yourselves and glory to Ukraine.